My name is Daniel Harris, I'm 50 years old, and I was born in the United States. I once sat in rooms where every word seemed to weigh tons, where decisions made in a single afternoon could shape the future of humanity. I worked side by side with Elon Musk, witnessed the first prototypes of electric cars come to life, sat through meetings where rockets capable of reaching Mars were discussed. It felt like living inside a science fiction lab that suddenly became reality right before my eyes. And yet, in the midst of all that spectacle of innovation, there was something no equation could solve and no project could answer: the silence inside me. A void that grew deeper with time, as if every achievement the world applauded was, for me, just another unanswered question. It was in that brutal contrast between material success and spiritual hunger that my life began to change. Before I continue with my story of conversion, write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this testimony is reaching. At Tesla, the future was always the central theme. Amid digital blueprints, energy efficiency calculations, and debates about silent motors, there was also room for bigger dreams: interplanetary travel, colonies on Mars, the idea that humanity could reinvent itself among the stars. I remember nights when we left meetings far too late, and as I lifted my eyes to California's dark sky, the constellations struck me with a different kind of force. There were billions of stars scattered like sparks in an endless expanse, and inevitably the question rose within me: is it all about exploring, conquering, and building more powerful machines? Or is there something beyond this that I still can't see? In the workplace, that restlessness seemed out of place. My colleagues were thrilled with every new breakthrough, every small technological victory. And of course, I was excited too. But at the same time, there was a kind of silence within me, as if my heart didn't match the group's enthusiasm. It was strange. While everyone celebrated the possibility of a future on Mars, I kept wondering what sense it made to conquer new worlds if we couldn't even live in peace on our own planet. That contrast started to grow inside me. During the long hours spent over calculations, I found myself distracted, gazing out the window, fascinated by the simple movement of clouds or by the moon rising on the horizon. The beauty of the cosmos didn't just inspire me to design rockets or imagine satellites. It made me feel small and at the same time deeply connected to something I couldn't yet name. The night sky felt like a reminder that there were questions science couldn't answer, at least not in the way I was searching for. Little by little, I began to realize that my attraction to space wasn't only scientific or technological, it was spiritual. Every star seemed to call me beyond engineering, beyond equations. It was as if the entire universe were trying to show me there was a creator behind that perfect order, behind that greatness no human mind could fully grasp. That intuition disturbed me and comforted me at the same time. I didn't yet have the courage to say it out loud, but I felt my journey was about to leave the laboratories and expand into something far greater: the search for the true meaning of existence. Living alongside Elon Musk was a unique experience. I saw him as someone who not only dreamed big, but also had the courage to turn ideas into reality. He could walk into a room and within minutes map out plans that seemed pulled from science fiction, yet soon after became tangible projects. Self-driving cars, reusable rockets, batteries capable of powering entire cities. It was impossible not to be impressed by his ability to merge vision with execution. But there was something few noticed. In more private conversations between meetings or during pauses, Elon would speak about existential angst. That was the term he used to describe the feeling of standing before a vast universe, full of possibilities, yet still sensing that something essential was missing. I remember one time when he said, "We can colonize Mars, we can extend human life, but what's the point if in the end, everything still returns to emptiness?" Those words echoed in me for weeks. It was a shock. I had always believed that technological progress would solve our greatest questions. But if even the brightest mind I knew admitted to this emptiness, could any human truly find definitive answers in science alone? If the relentless pursuit of innovation wasn't enough to bring peace to someone like him, what hope was there for ordinary people like me? Those reflections started to trouble me more and more. I looked at colleagues celebrating breakthroughs, investors thrilled over new prototypes, headlines praising the electric and space-driven future, yet beneath it all, the question remained: why are we doing all this? It felt like building skyscrapers on unstable ground. The foundation seemed far too fragile to sustain such massive dreams. And as I observed Elon, I noticed a contradiction that struck me hard. He represented the pinnacle of human reason, yet at the same time confessed to feeling trapped in a void no discovery could fill. That made me question not only the world around me, but also myself. I had devoted decades to material progress, but had I forgotten about inner progress? That doubt grew like a seed in my heart. With every new prototype, every new achievement, I felt we were answering the how of life, but not the why. And it was exactly then that I understood. Perhaps what was missing wasn't more science, but an answer that could only come from beyond human reach. The silence after major launches was deafening. When the cameras shut off, the charts rose, and the reports celebrated yet another record. I withdrew into my own inner world. There was an unease that wouldn't quiet down, as if something inside me was crying out for answers that weren't in spreadsheets or prototypes. I tried to drown that feeling by diving into more work, but as soon as night fell, the emptiness came back to haunt me. People congratulated me, saying I was living the dream, but I knew there was a lie hidden behind that rehearsed smile. Prestige surrounded me. Invitations to lectures and conferences kept increasing, but the peace I longed for seemed further away with each passing day. Inside me, a painful question grew louder. Why was everything the world called success not enough to give me meaning? I remembered the days when I first arrived at Tesla, full of enthusiasm, convinced that being part of something so grand would bring lasting satisfaction. But over time I realized that no matter how much we changed the way cars moved, nothing changed inside me. Progress was real, but it was external. My soul remained stuck. I began to secretly wonder if something was wrong with me. Was I ungrateful for not being content with a life many envied? Or was it that deep down there was a thirst within me that nothing material could quench? These doubts followed me on trips, in meetings, and even in moments of rest. I looked at other engineers and noticed that some shared the same anguish, but few had the courage to speak about it. It was during this phase that I started seeking refuge in books unrelated to my field. Philosophy, spirituality, stories of people who had abandoned brilliant careers to follow completely different paths. I wanted to understand why so many reached the top and yet still carried an unbearable weight inside. And as I read, I realized that this invisible discomfort wasn't mine alone. It was a universal mark of those trying to fill the heart only with external achievements. What frightened me was realizing that I could continue in that race for decades, and in the end, discover that I had built revolutionary machines but lost myself. That thought began to corrode my certainties and open space for a new kind of search, one that had nothing to do with technology, but with the very purpose of existence. Conversations with my Muslim colleague began casually, usually over lunch or during short breaks at work. I often spoke about the universe, about the vastness of space, and about how it seemed impossible to me that all of it was just chance. One day, he listened quietly and replied simply, "You look to the skies for answers, but maybe you should look to a book that speaks about the one who created them." Those words kept echoing in my mind. At first, my reaction was defensive. I saw myself as a man of science, shaped by calculations, formulas, and evidence. Could an ancient book really add anything to what years of academic study and professional experience hadn't resolved? Still, his gentle persistence eventually wore me down. I accepted when he offered me a translation of the Quran, though with a degree of suspicion. I took the copy home and that night decided to open a few pages. I expected to find vague language, commandments distant from modern reality, or concepts that clashed with my critical mind. But right from the first readings, I was surprised. Instead of confusing speeches, I found verses that spoke about the creation of the heavens, the alternation of day and night, the harmony between reason and faith. It was as if the text spoke not only to my analytical mind, but also to the emptiness I carried in my soul. There was a disarming clarity in those words. The Quran didn't ask me to turn off reason. On the contrary, it constantly called me to reflect, to observe, to question. Do they not see the sky above them? How we built it and adorned it without any flaws in it? That kind of message felt written directly for someone like me, used to seeking perfection in systems and machines, but blind to the perfection of the universe itself. The impact wasn't immediate in the sense of transforming me, but it cracked my conviction that science alone was enough. For the first time, I sensed that maybe there was knowledge that transcended the limits of laboratories. I kept reading out of curiosity, but each page seemed to answer questions I had never dared to put into words. When I closed the book that first night, I stood still in silence for long minutes. It wasn't just information I had received. It felt as if a door had been left slightly open, inviting me to cross through, and I knew that if I took the next step, my life would never be the same again. The nights of reading became a routine. I came home from work exhausted, but instead of switching off my mind in front of a screen, I opened the Quran again. Little by little, I began to notice a fundamental difference. It wasn't just a book to inform, but to transform. Each verse seemed directed at an unease I had carried for years. Among so many passages, some spoke of justice in a way that went beyond human logic. It wasn't just the justice of courts or contracts, but of a God who sees what is hidden and guides us to act rightly, even when no one is watching. That broke me down. How many times in my career had I sought recognition, awards, annual bonuses? Now, faced with those words, I understood that true worth wasn't in applause, but in acting with integrity before the Creator. Another point that touched me was mercy. I had always believed the universe was indifferent. Stars are born and die without caring about us. But the Quran presented a different view, that of a God who is near, compassionate, who cares about every detail of his creatures' lives. That perception gave me back something I no longer expected to find: hope. We weren't just loose particles drifting in space. There was purpose. There was care. The theme of purpose itself was the most transformative part. The book stated clearly that we were not created by chance. Our existence had direction, to worship God not only through rituals, but in every act of kindness, in every just decision, in every service to humanity. I realized it wasn't a denial of science, but a compliment that gave meaning to what I already admired. What good was designing futuristic cars if I didn't even know where my own life was heading? That vision made me see my achievements differently. Before, every goal reached was just another line on a resume. Now I began to reflect on how my skills could be used responsibly to serve something greater than my vanity. It was as if the Quran had given me not only answers, but a spiritual compass. At that time, I didn't yet call myself a Muslim, nor did I have the courage to declare a faith that contradicted my upbringing and my social circle. But inside, something had already changed. I no longer sought only to understand the universe. I wanted to learn to live according to the purpose for which I had been created. Despite the deep discoveries that already made crystalline sense in my analytical mind and had begun to touch the most sensitive fibers of my heart, inside me there was still a psychological wall that seemed absolutely unbreakable, the intellectual pride ingrained by decades of scientific training. I had grown deeply accustomed to being recognized and respected as someone with quick, precise answers, with flawless logic, with innovative solutions that constantly pushed the limits of possibility in the field of aerospace engineering. If professional colleagues, close relatives, and former university professors respected me and sought my opinion, it was precisely because I consistently represented the solid image of a man profoundly rational, methodically driven by verifiable facts and irrefutable empirical proof. My reputation had been built on strong foundations of scientific research, academic publications, and technological projects that revolutionized specific aspects of the aerospace industry. But now I was facing something completely different, something that simply didn't fit into elaborate charts, detailed spreadsheets, or complex mathematical calculations. Genuine faith required something my technical training had never valued: absolute trust in something beyond reason, conscious surrender to a transcendent reality, humble recognition that there is a wisdom infinitely superior to my limited intelligence. That revolutionary idea unsettled me deeply, on levels I was only beginning to understand. A persistent, familiar inner voice kept reminding me, "You have built your entire career methodically on precise numbers, verifiable data, and rigorous scientific methodology. How can you now, after all these years, lean entirely on something you cannot measure, quantify, or reproduce in a lab?" This existential tension was a daily battle that consumed significant mental and emotional energy. I intensely questioned myself, wondering if I was fundamentally betraying my academic background, denying years of scientific education, and compromising the intellectual integrity that had been my professional trademark. It was precisely at the height of this devastating internal conflict that I clearly realized the subtle psychological trap I was completely caught in. My intellectual pride, which I had always considered a driving force and professional virtue, was in reality nothing more than a sophisticated mental prison that severely limited me. The compulsive desire to maintain the public image of a completely self-sufficient, intellectually superior man, systematically kept me from acknowledging the fundamental fragility that we all, without exception, carry as an inherent condition of human existence. This realization led me to even deeper reflections on the real limits of human ability. I could design revolutionary aerospace vehicles that defy gravity and explore the edges of the solar system, but I couldn't even control a single irregular heartbeat when anxiety took hold of me. I could write extraordinarily complex software codes that controlled interplanetary navigation systems, but I couldn't stop a lonely tear from running down my face when existential loneliness struck me in the silent hours of the night. That brutal recognition of my own vulnerability was at once harsh and necessary for my personal growth. It was as if a relentless mirror had been placed before me, revealing not only my impressive abilities, but also my fundamental limitations as a human being. Gradually, I began to understand that true destructive pride didn't lie in embracing a religious faith, but in stubbornly refusing what my own soul already recognized internally as transcendent truth. It was as if I were desperately clinging to an artificial professional facade just to avoid looking intellectually weak before a world that, paradoxically, also had no definitive answers to life's most fundamental questions. When I fully realized this through weeks of intense reflection, I understood with revolutionary clarity that authentic faith neither diminished nor compromised my scientific intelligence, but completed it masterfully. Science showed me with admirable precision how the universe functions in its mechanical and physical aspects. Faith revealed to me the transcendent purpose and profound meaning of why it exists in the first place. Even so, letting go of intellectual pride completely was not an instant or easy process. There were particularly difficult days when I temporarily convinced myself that this whole spiritual pursuit was nothing more than uncontrolled emotion, a passing weakness to be overcome through pure reason. On other days, I painfully realized that my desperate attempts to rationalize and explain everything only left me more spiritually empty and less existentially satisfied. It was a completely silent battle fought in the corridors of my consciousness, but profoundly transformative in its implications. And the more I tried to run from this emerging spiritual reality, the more I realized an undeniable truth. God was not an improbable scientific hypothesis to be tested in a laboratory. He was already a living, present reality sustaining me with every breath, even when I didn't consciously acknowledge him. This prolonged inner struggle taught me something fundamental, that no sophisticated lab, no advanced university course, no international scientific conference could ever teach. To humbly recognize my smallness before the infinite Creator was the first essential step to experience true spiritual greatness that transcends any material or intellectual achievement. And little by little, through a gradual process of inner growth, I came to understand with absolute clarity that it was not intellectual weakness to surrender completely to Him. It was precisely at that point of conscious surrender that my true liberation from the prison of ego and destructive pride began. Slowly, with a growing awareness that surprised me daily, I realized that thinking differently from most of my scientific peers came at an extremely high social and professional cost. In the usual work circles, when someone spoke enthusiastically about technology as the ultimate and definitive solution to all fundamental human problems, I would carefully risk mentioning that there was something significant beyond material progress and technological development. The awkward silence that invariably followed such remarks was heavy as lead, filled with palpable discomfort and mutual misunderstanding. Some colleagues laughed discreetly, others looked away with obvious unease, as if I had just said something completely absurd or intellectually dishonest. At home, I discovered the situation was not substantially simpler or more comfortable. Relatives who had always genuinely taken pride in my rising professional path began to show growing concern about my mental stability and direction in life. To them, it seemed I was abandoning the rigorous logic that had taken me so far professionally in order to dive into something they considered fundamentally without solid scientific basis. Family conversations that once flowed naturally began turning into tense discussions and, increasingly often, ended with doors slammed shut or cold silences that lasted for days. What hurt most deeply was not necessarily the intellectual disagreement itself, but the overwhelming feeling of social and family isolation, as if I had suddenly become a complete stranger among the very people I loved most and thought truly knew me. Even so, there was within me an unshakable certainty that no external pressure could effectively weaken or diminish. For the first time in my adult life, I was not only accumulating impressive external achievements or professional recognition, but building something genuinely internal, solid, and enduring, which gave transcendent meaning to every step of my existence. Yes, social rejection hurt deeply and created emotional wounds that bled silently, but I could no longer honestly turn back from the spiritual path of discovery I had begun. The price of personal transformation was unquestionably high in terms of relationships and social acceptance, but the inner peace I was discovering was worth infinitely more than any external approval. The path to that decisive moment was filled with corrosive doubts, sleepless nights crowded with questions, and long, intense conversations with myself about the meaning of life and my real purpose in the universe. But when I finally walked through the simple door of the local mosque, I instinctively felt I was about to leave behind a psychological and spiritual burden I had carried for decades without even fully realizing its weight. The physical environment was deliberately simple and unadorned. The reverent silence among those present was tangible, and the atmosphere of genuine devotion in the air made me immediately understand that there was no room there for personal vanity, intellectual showmanship, or ego games, only sacred space for pure truth and authentic relationship with the divine. When I pronounced the Shahada with complete sincerity of heart, I felt as if invisible yet real chains that had bound me for years had instantly broken, freeing me into a new way of existing. I was no longer the aerospace engineer obsessively seeking definitive answers in complex mathematical formulas or revolutionary rocket projects. I was simply a human being before his creator, humbly recognizing that all scientific knowledge, every technological innovation, and every professional accomplishment are inevitably limited in their scope and duration, but Allah is infinite in His wisdom, power, and mercy. The spiritual liberation I experienced did not come through rigorous logic or scientific analysis, but through conscious and willing surrender. For the first time in my adult life, I did not need to prove anything to anyone, nor maintain elaborate masks of professional success or intellectual superiority. I was simply someone rediscovering his deepest essence, someone finally at peace with himself and with his place in the universe. Days after my transformative conversion, I realized clearly that I could not keep that revolutionary experience to myself. What had changed me so profoundly deserved to be shared widely, not as a personal victory to be celebrated, but as a living testimony that Allah mercifully guides whom He wills, even in the most unlikely places and through the most unexpected people. I picked up my personal camera, took a deep breath to calm my nerves, and began to speak with total honesty about my journey. In the video, I fully opened up about my personal path, from the high-tech laboratories and corporate meetings filled with innovation to the existentially silent nights when I felt completely empty, despite all external achievements. I spoke in detail about the persistent restlessness that no professional accomplishment could ease, and about how the Holy Quran showed me a way of life I never could have imagined possible. I didn't use impressive technical jargon, nor did I try to appear intellectually brilliant. I simply spoke as an ordinary man who had found true peace after years of searching. It was emotionally difficult to display my human vulnerability so publicly, but absolutely necessary for the authenticity of the message. And here I want to open my heart completely. If this story has touched you in any way, consider supporting this channel through the Super Thanks button. That valuable contribution helps bring transformative stories like mine to even more people who desperately need to hear that Allah changes lives in miraculous ways. Looking back on the entire journey, I realized that the doubts that had weighed on me for months were not unnecessary burdens, but a divine call to something infinitely greater than I could have imagined. Today I know with absolute certainty that the true purpose of life is not found in impressive technological achievements or purely human goals, but in willingly submitting to the Creator and living consciously according to His revealed will. The stars still shine majestically for me when I look at the night sky, but now each one serves as a constant reminder that there is an Almighty God who mercifully sustains everything that exists in the universe. Share this video widely in groups and on social media. You never know who may be waiting to hear precisely that genuine hope exists, that inner peace is an accessible reality, and that Allah never abandons those who seek Him with sincerity of heart.